Golf crowds are loud. They cheer for every birdie and every miracle shot. But listen closely at any event Phil Mickelson plays in 2026, and you will hear something missing. It is not the applause. It is the footsteps. For decades, Phil never walked alone. There was always a man behind him, carrying the weight of his decisions and the dirt on his clubs. That man knew Phil's fears before Phil spoke them. He read the wind better than the weatherman and talked Phil off ledges that nobody else could see. But that man is gone now. So is the next one. And the stranger holding Phil's bag today has no idea what he is really carrying. That silence beside him is louder than any gallery roar, and the reason for that silence is the one story Phil has spent years trying to bury. Phil is 56. He is missing majors he used to own. His league is hemorrhaging money. His home club kicked him out. The headlines scream about lawsuits and Saudi billions and the end of a career, but those headlines miss the real wound. The closest people to Phil Mickelson do not stand beside him anymore. Two men walked away from him. The first was his brother-in-arms for 25 years. The second was his actual brother, blood. They left at different times for different reasons, but the root of it all is the same. It traces back to one decision Phil made that changed everything. Not the decision to join LIV. That was just the symptom. The real decision was something darker, something that made the men who loved him realize they were no longer part of his future. In my view, losing a caddy hurts worse than losing a major. Do you think Bones and Tim made the right call to walk away? Hit subscribe if you want the real story. Every great partnership starts somewhere. For Phil Mickelson and Jim Bones Mackay, it started in 1992. Phil was 22, fresh out of Arizona State, with a swing like magic and a temper that could sink a ship. Bones was 27, a former college player who knew the game but was still finding his place. Nobody predicted these two strangers would become the longest-running player-caddy duo in modern golf. 25 years, longer than most marriages. In that time, Phil won 41 PGA Tour events and 5 major championships. He became one of the most recognizable athletes on the planet. And through all of it, Bones was there, not behind him, beside him. Bones wasn't a celebrity. He didn't want the spotlight. But anyone who watched Phil closely knew the man carrying the bag was just as important as the man swinging the club. Bones read the wind when Phil couldn't feel it. He calculated yardage when adrenaline was pumping too hard. He talked Phil down when risk-taking threatened to turn birdies into disasters. The bond went beyond the course. When Phil's wife Amy was diagnosed with cancer, Bones was the first person he called. That is the kind of trust that takes decades to build, and decades to destroy. Can you imagine trusting someone that deeply? Bones knew Phil's tells. He knew when Phil was bluffing. He knew which clubs Phil would reach for on instinct and which ones he should actually use. He was Phil's second brain. That trust was the foundation. It was why Phil could take impossible shots. It was why he could gamble on the course without fear. Because he knew Bones had his back. But in 2017, it all ended. The announcement came in June. Both sides called it a mutual decision. But the people closest to them knew that was a lie. Except it was never mutual. The people closest to them knew something had cracked beneath the surface. A tension over money that Phil never publicly acknowledged. A financial strain he refused to address. Not one argument. Not one bad round. Something deeper that made the man who carried Phil's clubs for half a lifetime realize the partnership had become something else entirely. Bones walked away without ever telling the full story. Phil has never told his side either. That silence is the loudest part of this tragedy. But losing his best friend was only the first blow. When Phil looked for someone to fill that empty space, he turned to the only person who could never refuse him. His own brother. Tim Mickelson was never supposed to be a caddy. He had a career, a good one. He was a successful college golf coach at Arizona State, building his own reputation. But when his older brother called in 2017, desperate and needing a replacement, Tim did not hesitate. He dropped everything. He left his job. He sacrificed his own path to carry Phil's bag. That is what brothers do. They show up, even when they know it might cost them. For the next 8 years, Tim walked those fairways beside Phil. And for a while, it looked like the decision paid off. But that moment of glory was just the calm before the storm. In 2021, at 50 years old, Phil won the PGA Championship at Kiawah Island. He became the oldest major champion in history. A moment of pure redemption. Tim was right there, holding the bag. That win should have been the happiest moment. But beneath the celebration, something was already shifting. Phil made a choice in 2022 that changed everything. He joined LIV Golf. He took the money from Saudi Arabia's public investment fund. He called it generational wealth, and he became the face of golf's greatest civil war. Tim was now walking next to a target. Every tournament became a battlefield, and the quiet college coach who just wanted to support his brother was caught in a war he never signed up for. Fans shouted at Phil. The media attacked him. His former peers distanced themselves. Tim, who had given up his career, started to realize he was carrying more than just clubs. He was carrying the weight of a decision Phil made alone. The pressure was relentless. The money Phil chased brought stress, not peace. The league Phil joined was unstable from the start. By 2024, the toll was visible. Phil was struggling. His game was fading. The LIV experiment was not working. And Tim made a choice of his own. He announced his retirement as Phil's caddy. The official reason was family matters. He wanted to spend more time with his own wife and children. He wanted his life back. But anyone paying attention knew the truth was more complicated. Tim didn't just leave for family. He left because he couldn't watch his brother destroy himself anymore. He left because the man he grew up with, the man he idolized, had become a stranger, driven by money and ego. He left because staying meant drowning alongside him. Even a brother can only carry so much weight before he has to put the bag down and walk away to save himself. Tim walked away to save his own family. But what he didn't know was that the money his brother sacrificed everything for was already disappearing. Now we get to the part of the story that Phil never wanted anyone to know. The part that explains why Bones really walked away, and why the number attached to that departure is the key to understanding everything that followed. When Bones left in 2017, the official story was clean. But behind closed doors, something ugly was happening. Phil was in serious financial trouble. He had been gambling for years, not just on the course, but in casinos and with private bookmakers. The losses had piled up, and he owed Bones a significant amount of money. Here is the number Phil never wanted public. Nearly $900,000. Bones had earned that money carrying Phil's bag for 25 years, and Phil could not pay him. $900,000. That is the real reason the closest caddy left. Not a fresh perspective, not new challenges. Bones asked for what he was owed, and Phil could not deliver. He was too deep in gambling debt. He had prioritized his bets over the man who had stood beside him through everything. Imagine that betrayal. 25 years of loyalty, 5 major championships, countless personal moments. And when Bones finally asked for his money, Phil had nothing. He had gambled it all away. That is not a mutual decision. That is a man being forced to walk away from someone he loved because that someone valued the casino more than his friendship. That was the first fracture. But the second fracture came from a place that was supposed to be safe, a place Phil called home for decades. The Farms Golf Club sits in Rancho Santa Fe, near Phil's hometown. It was his sanctuary, the place he practiced when nobody was watching, the place he belonged. He had been a member there for decades. In the spring of 2026, that changed. A female club employee accused Phil of inappropriate contact before a round. According to the investigation, he approached her in the clubhouse and made non-consensual physical contact. She rejected him and reported it. Club officials investigated, confronted Phil mid-round, and told him to leave. Phil's lawyer pushed back. His spokesperson called it a misunderstanding. But the club's statement was clear. An independent investigation, decisive action. His membership was terminated. The Farms was gone. Decades of routine, of identity, of a place that had nothing to do with the PGA Tour or LIV. Simply gone. And at the exact same moment, the rest of his world was unraveling. His league was dying. His sponsors had abandoned him. His peers were distancing themselves. The infrastructure of his standing was showing cracks everywhere. The Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia had poured over $5 billion into LIV Golf since 2022. $5 billion. That number is so large it is almost impossible to comprehend. But by early 2026, the PIF made a decision that shook the sport. They were pulling their funding at the end of the season. The money tap was turning off. LIV was dying. The league that had promised Phil generational wealth, the league that made him a pariah, was bankrupting. Leadership insisted everything was fine. But everyone in the industry knew the truth. Broadcast partners were nervous. Sponsors were looking for exits. Players were quietly negotiating with the PGA Tour to come back. And Phil was stuck. He had burned every bridge on the PGA Tour. The executives made it clear he was not welcome back. He was the face of the Saudi defection. Bringing him back would admit defeat, so they locked him out harder. On the other side, the league he joined was crumbling. Both doors were closing simultaneously. He was trapped in a nightmare he built himself. And the worst part? He learned about the PIF withdrawal from news reports. Not from management. Not from the people who asked him to stake his career on their promises. He found out the same way you did. That is the humiliation nobody talks about. A man who spent his life calculating odds had been put in a position with zero control. Phil stood at 56, watching his professional future collapse. But losing the league was not the deepest cut. The deepest cut came from a place he used to call home. He was defending a sinking ship, while the crew didn't even warn him the hull was breached. He argued on television that LIV was the future, while the people funding it were already packing their bags. And now, in 2026, Phil has missed the Masters. He has missed the PGA Championship. He did not even attempt to qualify for the US Open. 3 major championships in 1 year, 3 absences in 4 months. The Masters exemption is lifetime. He will always have a chair at Augusta. But the US Open at Shinnecock Hills was different. The USGA did not extend him a special invitation. 6 runner-up finishes at that course, a record that should have meant something, and he simply did not show up. The man who built his identity on chasing impossible majors has nowhere left to chase them. That is the reality of 2026. A Hall of Famer with nowhere to play, and the men who could have carried him through it are gone. But the most painful part is the irony of the gamble itself. Phil built his entire career on taking risks. He was Phil the Thrill. He took impossible shots because he believed he could control outcomes through sheer force. He gambled on the course. He gambled with moneylenders who threatened his family. He gambled on himself when nobody else would. That willingness to risk, that was his identity. And in 2022, he made the biggest gamble of his life. He bet on LIV. It seemed rational. The money was life-changing. The league was backed by billions. It looked like a win. But it was a gamble in a game where he did not understand the rules, where his celebrity and reputation were the actual stakes, not money. And he lost everything. Now Phil stands at 56, banned from the places he built, abandoned by the people he trusted, and holding a bag carried by a stranger who doesn't know his fears. That stranger is John Yarbrough. He is Phil's current caddy. He took over in 2024 after Tim retired. Phil has called him one of the best green readers he has ever seen. He is a professional. He knows the job. But John doesn't know Phil. Not really. He doesn't know the stories. He doesn't know the inside jokes. He is a hired gun, and that is all. Think about what that means. For 30 years, Phil walked the course with men who knew him better than anyone. They read his moods. They talked him off ledges. They were the only people who could tell Phil he was wrong and make him listen. Now he has a stranger. No history. No trust built over decades. No shared memories. When Phil looks at John, he sees a professional. But when he closes his eyes, he probably sees Bones standing beside him at Augusta, or Tim hugging him after the 2021 PGA Championship. Those men are gone, and they are not coming back. Phil wanted the money. He got the money. But he traded the one thing money cannot buy, the sound of footsteps behind you from someone who actually cares. The tragedy of Phil Mickelson is not that he made one wrong choice. It is that he made a series of rational-looking choices that compounded into something irreversible. He chose money over loyalty. He chose ego over family. He chose a collapsing league over a sport that worshipped him. And unlike the shots he took during his playing career, this gamble does not have another round to correct it. There is no second cut, no weekend comeback, no miracle putt on the final hole. The men who carried his clubs are gone. The league he bet on is dying. The home course he loved has banned him. The majors have moved on without him. He is 56. He has his Masters exemption for life. But what does that matter if he hasn't won a major in years? He could play the Champions Tour. He could do celebrity events. But that is not a career. That is a consolation prize. Phil built his career on taking risks. He gambled on impossible shots and won. He gambled on his own talent and proved everyone wrong. But in the end, he gambled on the wrong thing. He gambled that his legacy was solid enough to absorb anything. He gambled that the people who loved him would stay no matter what. He gambled that money could replace loyalty. He was wrong. In my view, The saddest part is not that Phil lost his game, it is that he lost the men who carried him through it. Do you think Bones and Tim made the right call? Hit subscribe for more stories like this.